Hello and welcome to another episode of Our Story, 250 Years of the United States of America. If you have just found this show, welcome aboard. We break down all 250 years of American history year by year in preparation for our 250th anniversary on July 4th of 2026. If you are returning, welcome back. No further introductions needed. Now let's get into the episode. It's a year of rare stability as America continues to put down roots and a new government solidifies its leadership. With the year containing few major shakeups, we'll be focusing on two main stories: governmental advancements and the first census. Of course, we'll continue to list other notable events of the year, including 3 eulogies for Declaration signatories and conflicts out west. Welcome to 1790 in America. It's New Year's Day in the United States of America, and Washington is putting the finishing touches on a speech he's set to deliver to Congress. Article 2 of the Constitution mandates that the President shall from time to time give Congress information of the state of the Union, and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient, but doesn't provide details on how such a message shall be delivered. As the first president, Washington is navigating uncharted territory, and the fact that his actions will inform precedent for future presidents is not lost on him. The setting and formality of his planned address mirror the well-established British custom of the annual King's Speech, in which the sitting king makes remarks to Parliament in order to share and promote his agenda. On January the 8th, George Washington arrives at Federal Hall and gives his first State of the Union address to Congress. To note a few highlights, Washington says, "Among the many interests which will engage your attention, that of providing for the common defense will merit particular regard. To be prepared for war is one of the most effectual means of preserving peace. A free people ought not only to be armed but disciplined, to which end a uniform and well-digested plan is requisite, and their safety and interest require that they should promote such manufactories as tend to render them independent of others for essential, particularly military supplies. The proper establishment of the troops, which may be deemed indispensable, will be entitled to mature consideration. In the arrangements which may be made respecting it, it will be of importance to conciliate the comfortable support of the officers and soldiers with a due regard to economy. There was reason to hope that the pacific measures adopted with regard to certain hostile tribes of Indians would have relieved the inhabitants of our southern and western frontiers from their depredations. But, if you will, perceive from the information contained in the papers which I shall direct to be laid before you, that we ought to be prepared to afford protection against those parts of the Union and, if necessary, to punish aggressors. Various considerations also render it expedient that the terms on which foreigners may be admitted to the rights of citizens should be speedily ascertained by a uniform rule of naturalization. Uniformity in the currency, weights, and measures of the United States is an object of great importance and will, I'm persuaded, be duly attended to. The advancement of agriculture, commerce, and manufactures by all proper means will not, I trust, need recommendation, but I cannot forbear intimating to you the expediency of giving effectual encouragement as well to the introduction of new and useful inventions from abroad, as to the exertions of skill and genius in producing them at home, and from facilitating the intercourse between the distant parts of our country by a due attention to the post office and post roads. Nor am I less persuaded that you will agree with me in opinion that there is nothing which can better deserve your patronage than the promotion of science and literature. Knowledge is in every country the surest basis of public happiness. In one in which the measures of government receive their impressions so immediately from the sense of the community as in ours, it is proportionably essential. To the security of a free constitution, it contributes in various ways. By convincing those who are entrusted with the public administration that every valuable end of government is best answered by the enlightened confidence of the people, and by teaching the people themselves to know and to value their own rights, to discern and provide against invasions of them, to distinguish between oppression and the necessary exercise of lawful authority, between burdens proceeding from a disregard to their convenience and those resulting from the inevitable exigencies of society, to discriminate the spirit of liberty from that of licentiousness, cherishing the first, avoiding the last, and uniting a speedy but temperate vigilance against encroachments with an inviolable respect to the laws. The welfare of our country is the great object to which our cares and efforts ought to be directed, and I shall derive great satisfaction from a cooperation with you in the pleasing though arduous task of ensuring to our fellow citizens the blessings which they have a right to expect from a free, efficient, and equal government. On February 2nd, the Supreme Court of the United States convenes for the first time in New York City and establishes its operational framework. 9 days later, on February 11th, 2 Quaker delegates from Philadelphia submit a petition to Congress urging the cessation of the slave trade, citing moral and humanitarian concerns rooted in Quaker principles of equality. The next day, a second petition from the Pennsylvania Society for Promoting the Abolition of Slavery, this time signed by Benjamin Franklin, demands both the end of the slave trade and the abolition of slavery itself, arguing it contradicts American principles of liberty. Both petitions are referred to a House committee which reports that the Constitution restricts Congress from prohibiting slave importation until 1808. And further states that Congress has no authority to prohibit a state from allowing the practice of keeping slaves. On March 1st, the first United States Census is authorized, and we'll talk more about this later. On the 6th of March, after 26 years of debate, New York passes a resolution consenting to Vermont's admission to the Union and authorizing state commissioners to negotiate details. These details are to include determining the state's border and settling land holdings of New York citizens in the state. By the 22nd, Thomas Jefferson reports to President George Washington as the new United States Secretary of State and is tasked with overseeing the census, the issuance of patents, the formation of the U.S. Mint, keeping of the Great Seal, and transmitting reports to Congress, amongst many other roles, including those relating to foreign affairs. On April 10th, the United States patent system is established, expanding the ability of an inventor to retain the rights to their inventions. Previously, there was no recourse for an inventor in one state who had their inventions copied in another, as state lines were the boundary for the recognition of patents. It's been the norm on this show to eulogize signers of the Declaration as they come up, partially as a means of acknowledging the men who began the great American experiment, and partially because recording a biography of each of these signers at once would have greatly increased the length of our 1776 episode. It's on April 17th of this year that we again pay tribute to a patriot and signer of the Declaration, this time Benjamin Franklin. As his life is better recorded than most, we have a bit more of a story to tell, but this is still far from an all-inclusive account. So, I'm asking you to join the conversation and share your favorite Benjamin Franklin stories with me using the hashtag 250YearsOfUSA or mentioning me directly. Now, Benjamin Franklin was born in a small house in Boston on January 6th of 1706. At the age of 10, after just 2 years of the only schooling he ever had, he began training with his father in the soap and candle-making business, though he did not take to it. His brother, James, established his own paper, the New England Courier. Franklin was bothered by not being permitted to submit writings of his own to his older brother's paper, so he created a character known as Silence Dogood, establishing her as the widowed wife of a clergyman. He would write opinionated letters under this pseudonym and at night would slip them under the Courier's door, where James would be sure to find them the next day. James was enchanted by the widow's essays and gladly printed them since they attracted considerable interest and comment from his readers. When James found out who the real author was, however, he was angry and a rift developed between the two. Franklin ran away in 1722 at 16 years old, eventually landing in Philadelphia. He soon found employment in a printing shop and boarded at the home of John and Sarah Reed, who had a daughter named Deborah. Franklin was introduced to the Pennsylvania governor William Keith, who admired his work and urged him to found his own printing shop, encouraging him to go to London to acquire printing equipment, and offered to assist Franklin with letters of credit. Franklin took him up on the deal and moved to London, though the letters never came. He got a job at a London printer and enjoyed the city life, but after just 2 years returned home in 1726. Franklin finally succeeds in setting up his own printing shop with a partner he later buys out, and while still in his early 20s buys the Pennsylvania Gazette. The next year, he marries Deborah Reed. By the mid-1740s, Franklin was considered the leading citizen of Philadelphia and the Pennsylvania colony. In 1748, at the age of 42, Franklin retired from his printing business in order to expand his studies of electricity, which were to gain him worldwide fame and election to Britain's Royal Society and the French Academy of Science. His writings on electricity and other specific subjects were translated into French, German, and Italian, and he was awarded honorary degrees from Yale, Harvard, William and Mary Oxford, and St. Andrews in Scotland, all with only 2 years of schooling as a child. He invented the lightning rod, the Franklin stove, bifocals, and the glass harmonica. He charted the dimensions of the Gulf Stream and advocated for the benefits of fresh air and citrus fruits for sailors. In 1754, as the French and Indian Wars broke out, representatives of the colonies met in Albany and Franklin proposed a unification of the colonies, though the idea took another 22 years to re-emerge. In 1766, Franklin was invited to appear before the House of Commons to answer 174 questions concerning taxation without representation, and a vigorous debate ensued. Franklin mentioned that Americans would never accept or enforce the Stamp Act, and members left the meeting impressed by Franklin's grasp of the tax situation. Soon after, the Stamp Act was repealed. In 73, Franklin acquired copies of secret letters from the royal governor of Massachusetts, showing that the governor favored abridging American liberties if necessary to prevent rebellious actions, and shared them with several friends. When Parliament learned that Franklin leaked, he was berated by the Solicitor General for over an hour, called a liar and a thief, and left the meeting determined to leave the country he loved and admired so much and return to America. Before leaving for Philadelphia, Franklin met several times with Lord Richard Howe to discuss reconciliation possibilities, but there was no consensus reached. Franklin's wife, Deborah, was terrified of sailing and didn't travel with him even as he lived in London for 18 years. She died in Philadelphia just before he returned home in 75, 2 weeks after the outbreak of hostilities at Lexington and Concord. The very next day, he was chosen as a delegate to the Second Continental Congress. Many of his activities from 76 to now we've already touched on in previous episodes in at least some extent. He is the only founding father to sign the Declaration of Independence, the Treaty of Paris, and the U.S. Constitution. He also played a key role in securing the alliance with France, which was vital for the American victory. And as we mentioned earlier in the episode, his last public action was to petition Congress for the abolition of slavery. So, we're now caught up to today, April 17th, when Benjamin Franklin dies. It's reported that over 20,000 people attend his funeral, and Madison requests the House of Representatives wear mourning for a month. Franklin's grave is inscribed with an epitaph of his own writing, which says, "The body of B. Franklin, printer." Like the cover of an old book, its contents torn out and stripped of its lettering and gilding, lies here, food for worms. But the work shall not be wholly lost, for it will, as he believed, appear once more in a new and more perfect edition, corrected and amended by the author. On March 26th, Congress passes the Naturalization Act. It states, "Any alien being a free white person who shall have resided within the limits and under the jurisdiction of the United States for the term of 2 years may be admitted to become a citizen thereof on application to any common law court of record in any one of the states wherein he shall have resided for the term of 1 year at least, and making proof to the satisfaction of such court that he is a person of good character, and taking the oath or affirmation prescribed by law to support the Constitution of the United States. The children of such persons so naturalized, dwelling within the United States, being under the age of 21 years at the time of such naturalization, shall also be considered as citizens of the United States. And the children of citizens of the United States that may be born beyond sea or out of the limits of the United States shall be considered as natural-born citizens, provided that the right of citizenship shall not descend to persons whose fathers have never been resident in the United States." For context, the United States has no federal passport or immigration restrictions, allowing free entry. Non-citizens face no federal restrictions on immigrating or purchasing property, though some states impose residency or loyalty requirements for land ownership. Voting rights are also determined by the states, with 5 to 7 states allowing white, male, non-citizens to vote if they meet other criteria such as property ownership or tax payment, age, and residency. It's hard to get precise numbers, but it's estimated between 4,000 to 8,000 free people have been immigrating to the United States each year since the end of the Revolution. On May 26th, approval of the Southwest Ordinance organizes the territory south of the Ohio River into a political district and establishes provisions for its interim governance by Congress with eventual transition to statehood, essentially doing for the southwestern region what was done in the Northwest Ordinance, though with a critical difference. Unlike in the North, slavery is permitted in this southern territory. 3 days later, Rhode Island officially ratifies the United States Constitution and becomes the last of the 13 to do so despite its strong anti-federalist stance. They have faced increasing economic isolation from the Union, being largely treated as a foreign entity, and in the end, it was likely the pressure from merchants in the state that feared the application of tariffs and other trade barriers and exclusion from commerce protections that pushed the state legislature to accept the Constitution. Federalist leaders in Congress have also been discussing dividing Rhode Island's territory amongst other states, which obviously alarmed locals and spurred the ratification talks. On May 31st, the first federal copyright protections are created in an act with the wordy title, "An Act for the Encouragement of Learning by Securing the Copies of Maps, Charts, and Books to the Authors and Proprietors of such copies during the times therein mentioned." Similar to the creation of a federal patenting system, this act ensures national protection for what was formerly only enforceable on a state level. Less than 2 weeks later, books begin becoming nationally copyrighted, the Philadelphia Spelling Book being the first. On June 20th, Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson hosts a dinner at his New York residence attended by Secretary of the Treasury Alexander Hamilton and Representative James Madison. Hamilton's plan for public credit suggests the federal government should assume state debts from the Revolutionary War, totaling approximately $25 million. Southern states, having paid much of their debts, have opposed this, citing it will disproportionately benefit northern states. Madison, representing Virginia, resists, but is also seeking a southern capital for the federal government, and the dinner facilitates a bargain. Madison agrees to secure votes for the debt assumption, while Hamilton agrees to support moving the capital to Philadelphia for 10 years, then to a permanent site on the Potomac by 1800. Within 1 month, the House passes the Residence Act, paving the way for the capital's relocation to a site along the Potomac River, and a month after that, an act including the federal assumption of war debt passes through Congress. On July 31st, Samuel Hopkins becomes the first person to be issued a U.S. patent, holding patent number 1 for an improved method of making potash. The first United States Census begins on August 2nd, and every head of household is required to answer the following questions or be fined $20. Name of head of family, number of free white males aged 16 years and upwards, including head of family, number of free white males under 16 years old, number of free white females including head of family, number of all other free persons, number of slaves. Now, it takes some time to get the count back from each state, but I've opted to go ahead and include them here. Across the 13 states, the total population is 3,929,214 people. 697,897 are slaves, and 59,557 are other free people. To provide some scale, since this initial census, our population has increased to about 90 times this number. There is an average population density of 4.5, which, again for comparison, is less than 1/20th of today's. Now, looking state by state, Connecticut has a population of 238,141 with around 2,700 slaves. Delaware has a total population of 59,094 with 8,887 slaves. Georgia has a total population of 82,548 with 29,264 slaves. Maryland has a total population of 319,728 with 103,036 slaves. The population of Massachusetts excluding Maine is 378,787 with 0 slaves. New Hampshire's population is 141,885, and there are about 150 slaves in the state. New Jersey has a population of 184,139 with 11,423 slaves. New York has a population of 340,120, and there are 21,324 slaves in the state. North Carolina has a total population of 393,751 with 100,572 slaves. Pennsylvania has a total population of 434,373 and 3,737 slaves. Rhode Island has a total population of 68,825 with 948 slaves. South Carolina has a total population of 249,073, and the state has 107,094 slaves. Finally, the population of Virginia is 747,610 individuals, with 292,627 slaves. Looking to the territories, Maine has a population of 96,000 roughly, Vermont 85,000, Kentucky 73,000, and the Southwest Territory 35,000. There is not an exact count for the Northwest Territory, though a reasonable estimate places the population at around 4,000 settlers. On August 4th, Congress passes the Tariff Act of 1790, which amends the act from last year and adjusts duties on imported teas and wines, but also notably authorizes the creation of the Revenue Cutter Service to enforce custom laws and prevent smuggling. 10 cutters soon patrol the coasts, operating under authority from the Treasury Department. On August 9th, Robert Gray makes history when his Columbia Rediviva returns to Boston after a 3-year trading journey, this becoming the first American ship to circumnavigate the globe. He returns with 2 Hawaiians who are the first of their people to see New England. October marks the passing of 2 signers of the Declaration, so we'll take a moment and first acknowledge the life of William Hooper. Hooper entered the sophomore class of Harvard College in 1757 at the age of 16, graduating in 63 with a master's degree. Although his father, the Reverend William Hooper, had groomed him for the ministry, the younger Hooper preferred the legal profession. In 64, he settled temporarily in Wilmington, North Carolina to begin the practice of law and became a circuit court lawyer. In 1769, British Governor William Tryon appointed Hooper Deputy Attorney General for the king in the Salisbury District Court, which inevitably ran afoul of the regulators. During the Hillsborough riots of September in 1770, Hooper reportedly was dragged through the streets by the regulators. Hooper served with Governor Tryon's militia that smashed the regulator movement at the Battle of Alamance in 1771, an early bookmark in the Revolutionary War. His formal entry into political life came in January of 73, when he sat for the first time in the Provincial Congress Assembly for North Carolina. He was the first selection, along with John Penn and Joseph Hughes, to represent North Carolina in the Continental Congress. Foreseeing not only greater conflict but also a triumphant outcome, Hooper wrote to his friend on April 26th, "The colonies are striding fast to independence and ere long will build an empire upon the ruins of Great Britain, will adapt its constitution, purged of its impurities, and from an experience of its defects, will guard against those evils which have wasted its vigor." Although Hooper was absent when independence was voted for and declared in July of 76, he signed his name in the amended Declaration on August 2nd. After attending 3 Congresses, he began to tire of the routine. Concerning his time in Congress, he declared despondently, "I am weary of politics. It is a study that corrupts the human heart, degrades the idea of human nature, and drives men to the expedients that morality must condemn." After facing malaria and other illnesses, William Hooper dies in Hillsborough, North Carolina on October 14th at the age of 48. Just 5 days later, Lyman Hall passes away in Georgia. Hall graduated from Yale College in the 1747 class, then studied theology under the guidance of his uncle, the Reverend Samuel Hall. After 4 years of preaching, he gave up the ministry to study medicine and received a degree as a doctor of medicine. In Georgia, more so than in sister colonies, there was great division in sentiment of loyalty. The royal party was active and strong, and the governor was enthusiastic in upholding the fortunes of the crown. Hall, however, attended meetings of the Friends of Liberty in Savannah, where he soon became good personal friends and and closely allied with Button Gwinnett in the movement for independence and the need for representation in the Continental Congress. Receiving the support of a local parish, in May of 75, Dr. Hall arrived in Philadelphia and was unanimously admitted as a delegate. On July 6th of 1776, at the age of 52, Lyman Hall voted for the Declaration and signed it on August 2nd, along with Georgia's Button Gwinnett and George Walton. He continued in Congress until 1780, when the British troops occupied Savannah. On the advice of Washington, he took his wife and son and fled the state to Connecticut, not to return until the last British troops had withdrawn from Georgia. For nearly 2 years, he remained absent and suffered great financial loss from the British confiscation of his home, plantation, and slaves. He quietly resumed the practice of medicine in Savannah upon his return in 1782, and in January of 83 he was elected governor of the state of Georgia. Upon the conclusion of this service, he once again resumed his medical practice and held no further public office. Lyman Hall passes away on October 19th at the age of 66 and is buried on his plantation overlooking the Savannah River. Back to our story, in early October, General Josiah Harmar leads 1,453 men, mostly men from state militias, north from Fort Washington to attack native villages. President Washington has ordered the raid against the Miami settlement of Kikionga, as it is the center of Indian resistance to U.S. migration across the Ohio River. The mission's one and only objective is to destroy Indian towns in the area, and marks the largest military action since the end of the Revolution. On October 7th, commissioners from Vermont and New York sign an agreement in New York City, finalizing the terms under which New York will relinquish its claim to Vermont. Vermont agrees to pay $30,000 to compensate the title holders of the disputed lands and effectively sets its borders as the land east of Lake Champlain and west of the Connecticut River, with some surveying to be done before the final lines are drawn. The decision by New York is made pursuant to a number of interests in the state. Vermont has been a thorn in the side of its neighboring states for decades and has even talked with Canada in a bid to have its independence recognized. The population has swelled to some 80,000, and the prospect of a serious fight for land is growing less and less attractive, and politically Hamilton has been a supporter of a 14th state in the north to gain additional representation, offsetting the influence of future southern states. While it's not official yet, the path is now cleared for a 14th united state, and Vermont legislators begin preparing for statehood, drafting a new constitution compliant with the federal constitution. Heading back out west, on October 15th, U.S. forces reach Kikionga, but find it has been razed and abandoned by the Miami themselves. After hearing reports of Indian forces gathering elsewhere, Harmar sends 300 men under John Hardin towards Eel River on the 17th. 2 days later, Hardin's forces suffer an absolute rout in an ambush led by the Miami war chief Little Turtle, and almost all U.S. forces are killed. Colonel David H. Morris was a sergeant in the expedition and kept a journal that's later transcribed by Colonel Joseph McMakin, in which he writes, "The Pennsylvania militia and the regular soldiers were left a prey to savage barbarity. 1 officer and 4 private soldiers never returned to the camp. The 19th was spent in camp. Cannon were fired throughout the day in hopes that some of the men had escaped the massacre and could find the camp from the sound. None came." Meanwhile, General Harmar has been burning all the villages in the area with the help of his men and finally retreats from Kikionga on October 21st. He soon hears, however, that the Miami have returned, so he heads back to Kikionga on the 22nd, splitting his forces and hoping to trap the Indians. The Miami hold their own, however, killing several men including Major Willis and the cavalry commander Major Fontaine. We'll read again from Colonel Morris. A small party of Indians on each wing fled as if defeated, and the horsemen pursued. As soon as the horsemen were separated from the footmen, the savages fell upon our people with the utmost fury. Major Willis was killed charging the enemy. Captain McMullen discovered that strategy of the enemy, wheeled about, approached the back of the Indians, and made dreadful havoc in their ranks. Captain Ashton was of the opinion that 40 of the enemy fell at the first fire. The Indians gave way and were driven across the St. Joseph River with great slaughter. 2 soldiers, Captain Ashton says, signalized themselves on this occasion by using their bayonets to gig the foe like fish. During the battle, an incident occurred that deserves to be noticed. An old Indian had 2 boys who rushed into the river by his side. One son was shot down near him. The old man dropped his gun and seized the son to save the boy's scalp from his enemies. The other son was killed too. The father drew them to shore and sat down between them, where he was killed. In the end, there are 183 dead soldiers Harmar must leave behind as he and his force head back to Fort Washington, and a similar number of dead Miami warriors. It's due to this defeat that Washington soon orders Arthur St. Clair to launch another military expedition against the Native Americans. On December 6th, Congress convenes in Philadelphia, marking the relocation of the federal government from New York City as mandated by the Residence Act. The Senate and House assemble in Congress Hall, a new purpose-built brick structure that will serve as the 10-year home of Congress until the eventual creation of a capital district per Madison's plans. If you have not seen the building, there's a video tour of it posted on our X today that's worth checking out, as the building has been restored to closely mirror what it looked like over 230 years ago. Finally, on December 8th, Washington delivers another address to Congress discussing the state of the Union. It has been heretofore known to Congress that frequent incursions have been made on our frontier settlements by certain banditti of Indians from the northwest side of the Ohio. These, with some of the tribes dwelling on and near the Wabash, have of late been particularly active in their depredations, and being emboldened by the impunity of their crimes and aided by such parts of the neighboring tribes as could be seduced to join in their hostilities or afford them a retreat for the prisoners and plunder, they have, instead of listening to the humane invitations and overtures made on the part of the United States, renewed their violences with fresh alacrity and greater effect. The lives of a number of valuable citizens have thus been sacrificed, and some of them under circumstances peculiarly shocking, while others have been carried into a deplorable captivity. These aggravated provocations rendered it essential to the safety of the Western settlements that the aggressors should be made sensible that the government of the Union is not less capable of punishing their crimes than it is disposed to respect their rights and reward their attachments. As this object could not be effected by defensive measures, it became necessary to put in force the act which empowers the President to call out the militia for the protection of the frontiers. And I have accordingly authorized an expedition in which the regular troops in that quarter are combined with such drafts of militia as were deemed sufficient. The event of the measure is yet unknown to me. The Secretary of War is directed to lay before you a statement of the information on which it is founded, as well as an estimate of the expense with which it will be attended. Well, that is it for this year. I do hope that you have enjoyed listening to our story from 1790. Next time, we will focus on the frontier and St. Clair's Western Campaign, the planning of the national capital, and more, so stay tuned for our Big Friday episode. Make sure you take a second to like this video if possible, subscribe to it on whatever platform you're on, And the most helpful thing that you could do for this show is share it with somebody that you think will appreciate it. We are trying to get the word out about our American history in time for our 250th anniversary, and whether through word of mouth, someone you know in person, someone you know online, please just take a moment and send this show to somebody that you think will enjoy it. This has been Our Story, 250 Years of the United States of America, and as always, thanks for listening.